Access Vision. Your voice, your community.
Okay. All right, great. So, interestingly, Greg and I have written a lot of grants for different industries. I am very arts and culture, and Greg is...
I started in the environmental field, so I did environmental conservation at kind of the local, state, and federal levels. Did that for about 10 years. Then I was in higher ed, which put me in a lot of different types, everything from community projects to research projects to capital projects, and more recently in child and family services. So kind of across the gamut.
Great. So now we'd love to do a show of hands on, and you know, we found out you don't have any grant writing experience, which is awesome. We want to know who has written, how many, would we say how many years?
Yeah, well, who else has zero?
Who else has zero? Okay, great. Who has maybe up to 5 years experience? And then who's over 5 years? Awesome. Okay, great. Cool.
Yeah, so kind of along the same lines, and it's not meant to kind of size people up, but different types of grant writers ask for different amounts of money. So even those with some experience, so like how many people have raised, you know, under 100,000? How many people have raised more than 100,000? Okay, so mix of experience. Anybody more than $1 million? Couple in the room.
Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. Understanding your grants and your funders. There are different types of funders, and there are different types of grants. So we're going to walk you through the different types and help you, the whole goal of this is to help you identify who you are and what kind of funders are going to support your cause, all right? And then we're going to help prepare you for the process. There are some things that need to be put together before you can submit a grant. So we're going to give you kind of a list of to-dos before you really even have to get started, some of which you may have to work on as you get started. And then from there, we're going to talk about what is the anatomy of a grant, what is included in a grant, what are the sort of standard questions they ask, the standard requirements they're looking for, what are those pretty standard questions across the board. And then we're going to give you advice from a fake website called grantmatch.com. You know, getting funding is a lot like dating, right? So we have created grantmatch.com, and after which we are going to have a little exercise with all of you where you're going to be speed dating with each other to talk about who you are, what you represent, the impact your cause is having, and you know, we can't wait for that part. And then we're going to give you some local resource sharing information, and then we'd love to also hear from you with any questions you may have.
So this is just somewhat of a joking slide here, but kind of like I said, I've never had any professional grant writing training to speak of. This is all from experience. So I think one of the things, just to level set anybody that's intimidated by grants or the people that have experience, I think first it's about being a strategic storyteller, and I think with emphasis on the strategic. You know, it's not always so serious, it's not always so straightforward. You have to inspire, you have to inform, and you have to engage the funder. So I think that a strategic storyteller is kind of a good way to look at the role of being a grant writer. It's not a certification, but as somebody who's got a little more creativity about this strategy. And a matchmaker between mission and money. You know, you really need to be the person that understands your need, your organization, and your mission, as well as the mission and of the funder. And you're trying to bring that mission and that money together. So it's a higher level of thinking. Sometimes it's easy to get caught in the weeds of a grant and lose sight of the bigger picture of the mission of the organizations that are trying to come together. But you're a matchmaker. It's kind of in the dating and grantmatch.com theme. You are the matchmaker. And I think this one is the best, which is somebody who makes resource gaps sound like an investment opportunity, which every grant kind of by the end really does do that. You're asking those foundations and funders to make an investment that they're never going to get back. So this is just a joking, but I think helpful slide to set the tone of what we think of the grant. So there's a couple of slides here in sort of the grants 101, and we don't want to spend a ton of time in these. You know, again, there's some folks in the room that don't have any experience, so I want to make sure that you kind of see and feel through some of the different grant types and some of the different funder types. Most of the time, I think most organizations are looking for program grants, right? We're going to do this to impact this population. It's programmatic. We need staffing. We need capacity. And so under the program grants, a lot of people are falling, but you know, this needs to be clear. What you're going to do, who's going to do it, how you're going to do it, what are the goals and outcomes of that program, and you fall under this program grant. A lot of folks tend to jump to that because they want to be more ready than they are. And I think this other type, the planning grants or seed grants, I think sometimes get looked over too quickly. When organizations or programs are honest with themselves, that's what you really need, time to plan. So sometimes when you're jumping in and saying we can or will accomplish all these things, but you've never done it before, you're not sure what partners you need, you're not even sure how much funding necessarily you need. Sometimes you just need that planning time and that seed money to get things started, to get yourself ready for the project or program that you're going to be proposing. It's also a good way to start dating with a foundation or a funder to let them know, you know, honestly where you're at in the process. Capacity building grants, in some ways they can be like seed grants or planning grants, but it's really more about your organizational capacity typically. Being able to get the equipment or the staffing to just do the basic functions of the organization that will get you ready to start planning or implementing or asking for funding on larger scales. Capital grants, you know, as somebody who writes grants a lot, people come and ask questions like, hey, we need this. It's really common. We need furniture, we need carpet, we need a new building, we need to renovate, things like that. I mean, these are capital improvement grants, and they can get very large scale, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, depending on the organization and what you're looking for. But these are typically hard to find, and you really have to have a certain type of funder to line up with capital grants, because it is a more expensive proposition, and a lot of funders tend to stay away from these. Things fade, things fall apart. You know, a lot of funders stay away from this type of investment, but it is out there. And then operating or support grants, I would just call them unrestricted grants. You know, these are the grants that just say, look, here we are, we're doing great things, we want to keep doing great things, and you're always looking for that funder that will give you an operational or unrestricted grant, because it just lets you keep the lights on, it lets you do whatever the most important need is to you at that time. Again, they're not super rare, but they're also typically not very large. So a lot of smaller grants, 1,000, maybe 5,000, are typical with unrestricted support grants, but there's larger ones out there. So these are the grant types, keep in mind. Next slide. So some of the grant sources, the first one being government, probably shouldn't be the first. I say they win the red tape award. I mean, this is the largest river of funding, right? Everybody thinks of government grants as being large, and we should go after them. I typically don't recommend that, especially if you're not very well versed in grant writing, or if the organization isn't prepared to deal with some of the bureaucracy that comes with this funding. Obviously of late, it's also very unpredictable. It comes and it goes with different programs, but it takes a lot of time, I think, to learn and understand and be able to work with government grants. So I would say this is one that if you're just beginning, that's probably not where I would start, or I would start with a very simple government grant if you can find one. Obviously there's local, state, and federal grants that you can also be looking at. Private foundations, I enjoy working with because they're typically established by a family or a person. In many cases, you know, when you look at some of these names, Kellogg, Kresge, Mott, and some of these are local names, some of these are regional. Usually the founder is since passed, and now it's being operated by directors and other individuals on behalf of them on some founding mission. But they're usually consistent with their mission. They're usually, even if they're larger ones, you can find that program officer, that person that you can work with and build that relationship. So I really like building a relationship with private foundations where you can find them. And these are these are some of the bigger names. There's a lot of private foundations out there that people don't know about, and if you can find them and build that relationship, it's really good to have. Community foundations, like our host today, are, I think, the best because they're it really is. I mean, they're formed by the community. They're about the community. There's a lot of diversity in the types of things you can ask for. Everything from those capacity building grants to those seed grants to the program grants, sometimes the capital grants, and especially when they get larger, like the Battle Creek Community Foundation. There's a lot of really great things that they can do working with the community, but they're in and of the community, and I think they're, again, my favorite to work with. The one thing I would say about community foundations, though, they're local, and because they're local, they want the impact to be local. And so a lot of folks, they'll come from an organization. You know, I work with Star Commonwealth, and we do things all over a city, a county, a region, a country, the world, and you really have to align your impact, right? And so sometimes it's, you try to fit a square peg in a round hole, and, well, we're over here doing this, but it kind of impacts people there. That's where it gets kind of tough. So making sure that your impact is localized to match the community foundation that you're working with. Corporate foundations, I think kind of like the family foundations, if you can get in, if you can build relationships, they can really be long lasting, but you gotta know who's who. I think it's really a networking thing, and getting inside corporate foundations sometimes is a little trickier. They don't always wear their mission on their sleeve and say, this is how and where you apply, so you really have to seek those out. But there are some large ones that you can go after. And then the individual donor advised funds. In this case, you'll see donor advised funds. Like if you look into a community foundation, you'll see a big long list of donor advised funds. In a way, we're talking about those, but there's also donor advised funds that are out there, and investment firms that kind of like those corporate connections. They're harder to find. They're less common that you can actually build a relationship because they've a lot of times already made up their mind what they want to do. But they do exist. That they're out there. It's just building those relationships with those individuals who are advising on where that money is going to go. So those are some of the grant sources. Do we have one more? No.
All right. So, oops, I measured myself. There we go.
So, the bottom line in this all is really about you getting out there and talking to people, because that is the best way. You got to build relationships. You got to date people. You got to find out who's the right person, right? So, all those things you heard him say, you got to know the right people. You got to build relationships. That is so key in any sort of fundraising, whether it's through grants or crowdsourcing campaigns or end of year appeal letters. I mean, all of those things is really key. It's just like life. Success equals partnerships, colleagues that believe in what you're doing, that are inspired by the work you're doing. So all of this kind of points back to that, and then what we're going to do here is sort of how do you tactically administer these paper grants. Well, they're all digital now. Well, most of them. Some family foundations, private foundations, still are paper. Okay, so preparing for the process. The 501c3, every funder is going to ask for it. There may be some of you that are fiscally sponsored or umbrellaed by a 501c3. You will have to provide the information about your fiscal sponsor as well. The annual operating budget. If you are newer if you have a newer territory and your operating budget feels slim, talk to somebody. See what operating budgets the standard is. Someone can give you a template. Someone can help you think through what to think about, right? You will need that for most all funders to show your operating budget. And then the audited financial statements, this is really only applicable to institutions that I think generate revenue over $500,000. Does that sound right? Anyone? Okay, well, so if you have, you know, $200,000 budget a year, you do not need an audit. You are not required by law to have an audit. Audits are very expensive. So look up those rules before you're like, oh my gosh, I have to pay $10,000 to get an audit. Make sure you actually are required to do so by law. The board of directors list. Board of directors, funders are looking at who's on your board. Where do they work? What is their affiliation? And are you showing a good representation of humans that have diverse backgrounds and experience and things that they bring to the table? So you really want to be thoughtful about building your board and what organizations surround those people. And then also, you know, are there any names you can bring in that have done wonderful things in the community already? Things along those lines. Your current strategic plan. Now, this is something every organization should go through to start, and then I would say at least every 5 to 10 years, 5 to 7 years, to get prepared for what the next 5 to 7 years look like. This actually, I don't have a lot of grants in my world that require a strategic plan, but it helps guide your prioritization of the funding you're seeking. Right? So this year we're really focusing on building up our programs and identifying who's coming to these programs. Okay, that is our audience. So then those programs, you can then go to funders and say, we've done this a few times. We want to ask for money to actually do it more so and really target this particular audience. And the organizational history and overview, absolutely. Absolutely. Whether you're a brand new organization, tell about your formation. Tell about why you were formed. And then for those that have some years or decades under their belt, that is a constantly morphing document because your accomplishments keep changing and maybe some of that older history isn't as relevant anymore. You constantly need to be reevaluating what the history of the organization is. And then you always want to make sure that you have your executive summaries. Make sure you know all the grants you have. You've got to keep a grant tracker. You've got to keep the years. You've got to keep those contracts that you have. Definitely organize yourself on, I got this grant on this date in this year for this amount from this funder. And that is also a really great way to start your grant calendar of deadlines, right? Because if you don't create and organize your deadlines calendar, you're gonna forget. And you're gonna be like, shoot, I didn't submit that grant. Or, shoot, I have 24 hours to do it, right? We've all been there. So these are kind of the basic documents that you should have on hand, and if you haven't created them or worked on them, do that now. Get yourself ahead of the game.
And let me add one more. So also I think with having at your fingertips past grants, past executive summaries, having that organizational history and overview, and past grant requests is, especially if you don't have that many in your pocket, it's easy to get into a new grant and start reinventing the wheel. You start rewriting and restating who you are and what you do to follow the guidelines of the funder. But the more you can reuse and repurpose and refine existing grants and existing executive summaries, you're going to save time in the end, and you're also going to start to become more consistent in your messaging and in your grants, so you don't have all these disparate, disconnected views of who you are and what you do. So another part of keeping those ready and organized is for future grants.
Definitely having templated language is the way to go. Because if you've got a strong program that you're trying to hit a couple, 3 funders, you're gonna just cut and paste that language, right? You're gonna cut and paste that language about who you are and what your history is. So I'm a Google Doc gal. I have Google Docs, folders for every funder, every grant I've ever submitted to them, for every client I've ever represented, and it just goes on and on and on. So you can see and pull from, oh, I'm gonna apply for that. I did that grant 18 months ago, let me pull that language and let me update it to where we are today, right? So really, really key on the organizational.
Again, a lot of these are more in the form of tips. In fact, a lot of this presentation is in the form of tips. But as far as doing your funder research, using search engines, using paid and free grant search engines. If you have the resources, some of the paid ones are nice because you can start to build an archive and you can track some of your grant processes also through those. So it's not just finding funding, it's also managing and tracking funding with some of those paid services. But honestly, Googling, Foundation Directory Online is another resource, also called Candid, that has some free access to things. I'll keep saying throughout this, I am more and more a ChatGPT fan. It is such a tool to find funding, to solicit funding, to create your executive summaries, to write your grants, and you can really start to bring that message together with a funder using ChatGPT. So I listed in here as a way to find funders, and yes, but some of that information is outdated, so I would suggest going to some more updated grant search databases. Search criteria is another key, and kind of like with ChatGPT or search engines or paid grant funder search tools, setting your criteria, setting the limitations of where you're looking, what you're doing, how much you're looking for, both in terms of what you're doing and what the funder is willing to do. When you really get into some of those grant search engines, being able to set the criteria, or as you're doing searches online, to set the criteria that way. I think the actual #1 advice is find somebody who does this and ask them for help. Go to the community foundation and work with people. They don't just want you to talk to them at the Battle Creek Community Foundation about the money that the Battle Creek Community Foundation has. They want to show you where and how to find some of those other funding sources. They have a lot of these tools too, but so do a lot of other grant writers. So don't necessarily take these tips and just feel like you're on your own. I think asking people for help is probably #1. Once you start to find those lists of funders, and it's not very hard to do to get a list of funders, taking the time to really dig in and look what they're supporting. Sometimes at the surface it'll sound like they support things in your area or like what you're doing, but when you really drill down into that funder focus, you might find some details that maybe aren't aligned and maybe aren't worth chasing. So as you look and do that homework, I just call them profiles, right? Create a profile on each of those funders and the different grants or funding opportunities that they have, and then start to prioritize. Because again, one might be really appealing because they look like they have a lot of money, but they might be the hardest to get money from. So being able to decide where's the easier, more targeted grants, having done the research, and then start actually going after grants. Once you have the list, and I guess I should add, try to get at least a year or 2 out. Grants are not a 6-week or in some cases even 6-month turnaround once you find the opportunity. Seeing where those cycles are at, getting ready for those cycles, getting all the things together that you're going to need. Try to set that priority list for at least a year, if not 2 or more years out, so you can start to plan to work with those foundations ahead of time. So once you've got that kind of priority list, doesn't matter what calendar you use, or again, if you're using a paid grant kind of management service, setting those reminders and getting on that cycle, setting reminders to start preparing 6 months, 12 months in advance for these is really key. So again, I think everybody obviously knows how to use a calendar, but for some reason with grants, and I do this still after 25 years, is you procrastinate, right? You push push yourself against the deadline, and it's not good for you, it's not good for the funder, and it's a lot of time and effort. So managing your time, getting ready. Another thing that I make the mistake of a lot is not alerting people within my team. Maybe that's internal to the organization, maybe that's external and partners that you know you're gonna need to be working with. Don't surprise people with the grant writing process. It usually doesn't go well, it gets really stressful. And there's a lot of moving parts, so getting people at least aware of those same deadlines that you know about, let other people that you're gonna be engaging with know that you're kind of on this plan, on this cycle, and you're gonna be reaching out for a letter of support at some point. You're gonna be reaching out for help writing the grant at some point.
And let me jump in on that. Greg and I have actually partnered on some programs in our past, and I'm usually the one providing art programs for different aspects of what Star Commonwealth does, particularly around Calhoun County. And so I will email Greg and then copy whoever the team members are for the particular program, and I'll say, hey, I need a letter of recommendation. I also need to know, you know, the demographics of the kids that are in the classes. Like, I need to have all of that data, and I do it as early as I possibly can, because Star Commonwealth is much bigger than some of the clients that I represent, right? They have a lot more people to go through, they have approval processes that have to go through. So I'm mindful when I am doing that they have to go through a period of time before I'm gonna get anything back. And I probably have to follow up a few times as well. Never be scared to follow up. That is key to success in all fundraising. Someone may say to you, I want to give you $10,000, and unless you follow up, they're never going to write that check, right? And you got to follow up sometimes 3-4 times. And so, I have a big funder right now for a client that is giving us a sizable donation that they committed to in writing at the end of last year. And I have been chasing and chasing and chasing and going up the chain, up the chain, up the chain. I finally got an email last week saying the check has been cut and is on the way, and I was like, ugh! So, you know, it's just one of those things where you have to chase it, and you have to be prepared to be that person in chasing those things.
Yeah, there was another.
Like Greg, I had to chase Greg.
It's true. I mean, people with good intentions, and they want to give you that letter of support, but they will forget, right? It's herding cats, and you're liable at the end. You're the face of presenting that grant at the end of the day. So, organization is what it's really about. I'd also encourage scheduling meetings. So not just, hey, heads up, I want to get this or I want to do that, especially when you're talking about grants that involve partnerships and other organizations. Schedule a meeting with the key people that are going to be involved in that grant. That's internal to the organization and external. You just get so much done so much faster when you get people in the same room and say, do we all agree? This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. These are the resources and the time commitments we need from everybody. Getting that commitment in person, face to face, early in a meeting process, just sets you up for success later. Because again, nobody wants to create that emergency for somebody else, and it's really easy to do with grants and grant deadlines.
And I'll add to that too. It is so, particularly for private foundations and community foundations, and even some of the state funding, get a hold of the person that is going to be selling and presenting your grant to the deciding body, right? So if I submit a grant, or I want to submit a grant to the Battle Creek Community Foundation, I'm like, hey, Kira Hill, what's up, girl? We need to talk. And then we have a Zoom, and we talk, and we go through all the things in the grant, and she'll ask questions and poke holes, and then it helps me understand maybe there are some shifting funding priorities happening in that particular institution. Every time you apply, reach out to that program officer or the person that's going to be your advocate in that decision-making room.
I think it comes up in our dating advice here on the next slide, but I 100% double down. It's not just internally your team, it's not just the partners. One of your partners is going to be the funder. Treat them like a partner, right? They're an investor, they're a partner. Build the relationship, get to know them, have the face-to-face. They want to help you. They don't want to this kind of goes back to, the more you do this, the more you have a template, the more you know what you're asking for, and you're asking for it maybe a little differently each time, but the more you do that, the more you can save time here. But if you're trying a new project, a new program, a new need, a new funder, if you're not 6 to 8 weeks out when you start writing the actual grant and looking at the grant application form and starting to fill things out, you're probably too late. It's gonna be really hard to put things together. So kind of that 6 to 8 weeks is the minimum suggestion.
All right, so this is sort of your recap, right? So on the right side of the screen, the executive summary, which also is kind of your purpose of the grant. Like, why are you writing this? Why are you coming to us? What is it that you really need? That executive summary, they're always gonna the grants, funders a lot of times start with that. Why are you even reaching out to us? They say it more nicely, but that's the gist. And then from there, it's the statement of need. What is it, what need is your organization filling? Right? So if you're an arts organization, here's an example. Visual arts in our public schools aren't as robust as they could be, right? And not every school has a visual art program. So one of my clients is a visual arts center, and they provide in-school art classes across the county. That is a need we are filling for the creative expression of kids that don't necessarily get access to arts in other ways, in other areas of their life. The project description, this is when you're going to go into the details of what the project is, of what the program is, of how that need is going to be fulfilled. What are those details? Then from there, your goals and objectives. That's kind of clear. And here's the other interesting thing, and we touch on this later too. A lot of these questions are going to have a repetitive feel. And the thing is, and if you think about your own brain, we all need to hear something several times, maybe being said in different ways before it really sinks in and we actually absorb it. And that's what these grant applications are. You are kind of gently hammering over their heads what it is you're doing, why it's important, and why they should help. Right? So it is going to feel repetitive, but you can't think of it that way. You really have to think about what we talked about in the beginning. It's a story, right? If you're reading a book, you're having a beginning, middle, and end. Think of every grant narrative just like that. What is the beginning? This is who we are, this is what we're doing, then we're going to get into all the juicy details, and at the end, this is why you should support us, you're amazing, thank you so much, right? Beginning, middle, and end.
Yep, and look on the right side, I mean, so just the saying to stick with you is that grant should echo, not ramble. That's the idea.
Then we go into the evaluation plan, and Gregg and I were actually talking about this on the car ride here today. In my sector, arts and culture, a lot of times evaluation is a difficult one. So he was like, just get someone that knows. Just ask someone, ask an evaluator. And he's right, and I have over the years. But arts and culture have more of an intrinsic value, is what it's called. Whereas, health and human services, you fed this many people, poverty's down X amount, poverty's up X amount. We've got the numbers of participants and attendees, and we've got the great testimonials in arts and culture, but it's that quantitative data that does not exist, and we need the help of evaluators with that lovely PhD.
And if I could add too, so I hadn't really thought about this in terms of the presentation yet, but when funders, are asking for evaluation, they obviously want to know that you are going to be able to assess, did you do the thing you said you were going to do? Did you have the impact that you said you were going to have, and what was it? But sometimes what you don't see is the funders also evaluate their investments. And so they're, especially a community fund, they're investing millions of dollars all over the place. And this information comes together. And so they're evaluating their own investments as well. So it's not just about holding you accountable, but that is part of it, to be able to know that you had the impact. But showed that they had the collective impact they wanna have. So if that information isn't there, then donors, foundations, agencies get to that point where they say, well, then we don't know what we did with that money. So think about that with public funding, right? They're accountable to somebody, to the donor advised fund, to the taxpayer, to whoever, you know, they got their resources from. So it actually trickles back up into the funder as well. Why it's important.
And then we go into the organizational capacity and the partnerships. A lot of times, the organizational capacity, maybe especially if you're starting out, you've got a lot of volunteers, right? And maybe you have one paid person. So your capacity is then subsidized through partnerships, right? So as an example, like when I partner with Star Commonwealth, they have a great infrastructure of staff running their programs. There are some things, however, their staff doesn't have the needed expertise for certain things. And that's where I can come in and be like, hey, let me do this with you. And then a great partnership gets born, and it helps build the capacity for my clients' organizations as well. We can do more with other organizations in the mix. And then the sustainability plan, this is always a sticky wicket when it comes to talking about sustainability. Particularly for smaller nonprofits. It always feels like we're like, hopefully break even, right? And there's also an interesting misconception that nonprofits aren't allowed to make a profit, which is also not true. But the sustainability plan, there is, I think this is where, when you're talking about your strategic plans, you have to look at like, okay, we broke even barely this year, but maybe next year we're gonna make a little bit more profit through this new revenue idea. So you're always trying to kind of come up with new revenue streams, but in the end, funders do understand sustainability is tough for younger nonprofits. It's just tough, unless it comes with a large endowment, and even then. The sustainability plans are tough ones, and it always makes you feel like a crazy person, at least me, when I'm like, I don't know when it's gonna be sustainable, I'm not sure. And then you just kind of try to spin it a little bit. But I've had conversations like this with all the funders and all my partners. I'm like, we're just not there yet, we're almost there. And then the narrative is always, we thought we were gonna get sustainable with this thing, but that didn't completely work, so now we're trying this thing. You know, so it's kind of a little creative thing. Do you wanna add anything to that?
I think what I would add is that the funder in part wants to know you're not just gonna be back every 6 months or every 12 months. So part of a sustainability plan is to show them why you're not gonna just keep coming back for the same thing. But it also made me think about the different types of grants. And so again, some organizations, or when you're grant writing and you get really excited, you wanna overpromise and think you can deliver and sustain all these things, but the reality sets in when you get there that this really isn't sustainable. Look in the rearview mirror and say, should we have been doing a capacity building grant? Should we have been doing a planning grant? Should we have been more reasonable about the expectations we were trying to set for the funder, that this is the program, this is the project, and we will never be talking again? Because sometimes it's just, you could have corrected that early on so you didn't have to overpromise that sustainability too soon, and funders do and will understand that as well. So it's looking ahead and looking behind and making sure that,
Transparency is really key. You really are not trying to like hide anything. So there are a lot of programs that I write grants for that are completely grant funded, right? So you've got an institution that has some profit that goes toward it, but really it's never going to make money because there's no revenue stream, because it is a complete service for people in need. Right? So they also understand that. Funders understand that. So don't ever feel like you have to white lie or fudge. Like, transparency is the way to go, and to be very, they say that out loud. I don't know when it will be sustainable. I like to use the word a lot in particularly in program grants, I like to use the word pilot program, where you can help me get money to test this thing out and see if there are revenue streams, if this is even something that people want, if this is gonna be effective, and if it is gonna fill the need that we think it's going to fill, right? Pilot programs are always, you can understand them, you can relate to them, you're trying something new. And then the last thing is the budget and the budget narrative. We've talked about the narrative and that it is a story. The budget, the numbers, have to tell the same story, have to support that same story. And I find a lot of clients kind of have a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to that. But my biggest advice is, if you are talking about, we're gonna serve X amount of people in this year, and it's gonna cost X, do the math. Make sure your formulas that you're writing in your narrative actually match the numbers in your budget. Make notes in your budget for yourself. A lot of times funders will have a whole section of budget notes, and that is where you can reiterate the numbers you articulated in the narrative as well.
So, not everybody does it this way, so take or leave the advice or test it out. I like to start the grant process with a budget. It's nice to have an executive summary and kind of a starting point of how much do we want, what are we gonna do with it. But I actually a lot of times work in reverse and try to really know what it is we need to do the work that we're gonna do, and start writing that justification alongside the budget. Because then when you're writing the grant, you're thinking about that. So it's kind of like reverse engineering, but like Jen said, you want these all to echo and tie together. So sometimes starting at both ends of the grant proposal, having that executive summary and then having a strong budget and justification, doesn't need to be in a lot of depth, but it makes sense when you look at the budget. Then when you're writing, your words are gonna make a lot more sense as well. On the right side, I don't wanna go through all of these, but these are, again, kind of like tips, right? Like we said, grant should echo, not ramble. Dial the executive summary, write your proposal, write your budget, go back and redial your executive summary. It's your elevator pitch, it's how you're gonna get to know them. Telling a true story of need, so it's easy to spin yarn and try to say this is the most dire situation ever, that I have no data to back up, that I have no evidence or reputable sources. It's just trustme.com. This is really important. Speaking the funder's language, right? This is part of doing your grant research and reusing some of their words without plagiarizing and just repeating everything they said they wanted to do. But make sure that you've read their guidelines and you're echoing some of their language in your proposal. This Be Smart is not anything but the SMART acronym of be strategic, be measurable in what you're doing, make sure it's achievable. Don't promise everything that could happen for these youth in a program. They get an instrument in their hands and they're gonna live happier, longer lives, right? You know, back this up, be achievable in what you say you're gonna do. What's R?
Realistic.
Relevant?
Realistic.
Relevant. I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant. I got $5 on that if anybody wants to take me. I think it's relevant. And it'd be time bound, right? And so this can't, you know, make sure you've got a clear start and stop to the money and the time that you're asking for. Prove your ability, incorporate partnerships, talk to an evaluator, don't overpromise, and make sure the price is right. So again, you kind of see in this through the presentation here. Tips and how-tos. You're gonna see a lot of repeat here, so this is kind of
It's just like
health check point. If you don't see some truth in these, then we kind of haven't done our job up to this point. I also want to note we're at the 50-minute mark. We've got 90, so I think we've got a good amount of time to finish this up. You want to kick it off?
Sure. Do you guys like this metaphor? It's kind of cute, right?
ChatGPT.
It was Gregg's idea via ChatGPT. Know your type, right? We're all looking for the right type, but we have to do our research. We have to figure it out, and we have to also understand and absorb what our mission is, right? What your institution's mission is and what you're looking for. Don't be an imposter. That's that whole transparency thing. Don't lie. Just be yourself. Use your words. You know, I find that the storytelling comes more easily if you speak from the heart and you speak what you know. And then you can go back and you can pull out those numbers and the budget and the things like that. I always start with the storytelling. That is how my process goes. I start with the storytelling and I end with the numbers and the formulas and all of those kinds of things. Make a good first impression. It's that power statement. It's just like any book or movie you see, that first scene, it's got to grab you. And that's what you got to do in grant writing as well.
And dating.
And dating, says the guy that's been married for 1,000 years.
All right, I've been dating for 34 years, but I'm sure.
And it's not all about you. This is really, go talk to people. Go talk to your funders. Make sure that they can answer your questions, that they know you exist, that they understand your mission, and then know what you want. It's like everyone, you know, when you're like, I don't really know what I'm looking for in a guy right now. You need to know what you're looking for in a funder. You need to know exactly what your organization needs, and you need to be very clear with them. And then prepare for the long haul. ChatGPT is quite witty. Have a sustainability plan. Nobody wants a fling. And that's true. You know, they do. That's why I say pilot programs, so that you can then get a little seed money for that. And then you come back the next year and say, hey, this is what we found worked. And this part of that program, that's what we want to focus on this year. So will you help us kick off the larger program now, right? That's the sustainability, and that's what's going to lead you down the path to success. Don't ghost them. Do not forget final reports. They're real, and funders in general are not open to lateness on final reports. Some funders will hold back money until you submit your final report. So make sure those are part of your calendar of deadlines as well. And also, if a funder emails you, you're going to get, after you submit a grant, you're going to get follow-up questions a lot of times. Hey, our committee had a question about this, this, and this. You need to respond to that. They're going to give you a deadline. My philosophy, you do it within the next 24 hours. You get it done. And a lot of times those questions are ones you can answer off the top of your head because you know this thing. It's inside of you, right? Even if you're new to a job, you took this job for a reason. You're really interested in this mission, or there's something that you found passion in, which is why you ended up there. Make sure you respond to people overly timely, in an overly timely manner. Bring receipts. I do all my own bookkeeping for my life, and I am old school. I don't know what the laws are anymore. I have so many receipts from things, just in case a funder asks for it. I keep them in a folder with that funder's name, with the year, I mean the whole thing. So, you know, the receipts are helpful, but it's also really about making sure that, especially in government funding, you have got to have like great reporting for your folks. And then say thank you and sorry. Thank you so much, and oh my gosh, so there's also, for instance, let's say you got the grant, the money came in, and you realized you have to change the date of something, or you kind of need to adjust the scope because of a certain situation. Call your funder immediately. Talk to them about what's going on. They will work with you to figure out if it's cool. And generally it's cool. It's cool to have to change some things about it. I had a whole program that got funded. I had 3 different funders for it, and it was supposed to be in October of a particular year, and the people that were facilitating it with 2 months out were unable to come during those dates. So I had to, and it meant it was going to cross into another fiscal year, right? So I had to call funders and say, oh man, so this is happening. They're like, it's cool. As long as you get the program done by X and the final report done by Y, we're cool, right? So you just have to make sure you're in communication, and don't be afraid to be honest. Really don't ever feel like you've done something wrong. Stuff happens.
Could I add too, because there's some grant writers, people that might be in a black box, they write the grant, they give it to the program people or others outside your organization, and they're doing the work, reiterating that same thing, because a lot of times you have people implementing a program and they don't tell you that something might be falling off track, or something might not be going right, or something might be going great, and they're not sharing that. You're a translator between sometimes the program folks and the funder to be able to say thank you or sorry when things aren't going right. So another part of, I guess, being a grant writer, unfortunately, is you're also a project manager, and you need to know what's going on before, during, and after the grant.
Good point. And then rejection isn't the end. There's plenty of fish in the sea. You will get no's. You will get no's. A lot of funders will offer feedback. Some have committees where they will give you the committee's feedback. Other times it will be your program director that will say, this is what the conversation was. It is not necessarily a reflection on you, the person, but the funder is going to ask you to look at some issues within your grant. Maybe there were some inconsistencies. Maybe it felt I got dinged on a grant years ago because I was talking about the wrong year in my grant narrative. Whoa, that is the dumbest mistake. I was so mad at myself, right? But that happens, right? So you can get dinged. So you really also proofread. Especially, I build grants in Google Docs, and then I import them into the electronic systems, because a lot of times if you write the grant in the electronic systems, it's going to crash and you're going to lose it all. Do not fall trap to that. What I do is I go in and I copy and paste every question in the digital application. I put it into a file and I write everything in there. And then I go into the system and put it in. That's my way of doing things. All right.
I think we're
Here we are.
in a speed dating mode. So we have about, what, 40?
Half an hour.
Half hour. We're going to try to do this efficiently. Just spend a few minutes thinking about your own organization, your own needs. Do not make this an intimidating competitive venture in your head. Just try to wrap your head around a grant you're writing or have written, or a need that you have right now in your organization, and just try to come up with that elevator pitch. Who are you? How much are you asking for? What are you going to do with the money, and when? And what are some of the very identifiable impacts that you think you're going to have? And again, just jot some notes down and try to rehearse in your head a little bit. How can you say this in less than a minute? Because that's what we're going to take in a second here. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to just think about it. Again, jot some notes down.
2 minutes on the timer.
Yep. And then when we're done, I know the tables vary a little bit, but we can mix and match. But try to get, like, maybe move right here so there's 3 of you. And at a table where maybe you have more, that's fine. I don't think we need to shake the room up a lot, because at a multiple table, maybe just start going around, let everybody get their minute. Because again, this is not a competition. This is not, should not be a test. Part of this is to just see if you can wrap your head around what it is you really want, and put it into words. And the other part about this is we really want to get you guys networking, because this is your resource. This
vision.
2 minutes starts
Your
now.
voice, your community.